Welcome everyone, I'm Barkha and this is NerdRx podcast. And in today's episode, we are going to talk about a technique that has revolutionized the way we look at proteins, and it is cryo-electron microscopy. And to talk more about cryo-EM, we have a very good friend of mine, Dr. Claudio Catalano, who has an intensive experience in working with cryo-EM. So let's hear it from him. Welcome, Claudio.
Hello, everyone. My name is Claudio, like Mark said. I'm coming from the most beautiful country in the world, Italy, in which,
Of course.
in which I got my bachelor plus master at the University of Messina in pharmaceutical chemistry and technology. So this is kind of a mixture between medicinal chemistry, pharmaceutics, and pharmacotherapy. Then I decided to pursue my PhD in United States at the University of Virginia Commonwealth. When I did my bachelor, I started doing computational chemistry. So I was doing molecular dynamics with the screening, etc. So I knew a professor at VCU that was doing all of this, Professor Glenn Kellogg. And when I started, I asked him, "Oh, can I join your lab?" And he said, "Oh, you can join, but my funding right now are kind of short, so
Correct.
I will suggest you to work together with another professor. He's a young one, and his name is Yuzhong Guo. And he was working in membrane protein purification and structure determination, using this new technique, or not that new, it's cryo-electron microscopy is from the 1930s. The first microscope was made in 1930s. But there was what we call the resolution revolution in 2015, 2012, in which the camera that was recording each dataset was changed from CDC to direct electrons, so DE, and this improved notably the resolution of the protein or biomolecules in general that you can get from this microscope. So that's how I was first introduced to this technique. It was told me that this would have been the technique of the future for structural biology. And that's true, because
and it is proving itself, with so many new structures we are seeing every day in papers, especially Nature. Like every time you open the journal, there is some new structure published there.
Yes, we're using Cryo-EM. Also because nowadays I'm working for a company, a CRO, called the Nanoimaging Service. And we noticed in the last few years that there is a boom also in industry using Cryo-EM.
Okay.
And I think that is also because during the years there was a change in who is heading the structural biology. So before, where all people used to use X-ray crystallography.
Yes.
And now instead there are people that came out from their PhD, their postdocs, using Cryo-EM, and they are fascinated by this technique. So they also introduced these in industry. So it's not only a technique used in academia right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so during my PhD, while we were purifying a lot of membrane proteins, we used to... At that time, when I started, we were using a lot NYSBC. That is one of the national center for Cryo-EM, or in general for structural biology. I think right now they have like 7 cryoses. So it's like a farm of cryos. Cryos is the most powerful microscope that is released until now. And every 2-3 months we were going to New York in
Oh,
a
it's in New York?
bus.
Okay.
Yes,
Oh, yeah, I remember you guys going to New York. Oh, yeah, 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 correct. Okay.
in a bus for 7 hours.
I couldn't imagine that would be fun, but
Yeah,
yeah, for science.
yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction. So now let's get to the basics for our listeners who don't know much about cryo-EM. And yes, you briefly mentioned X-ray crystallography, so we'll definitely touch upon that. So, okay, let's to begin with. What is cryo-electron microscopy in like the easiest terms?
So you have to think about it. It's like a microscope. Microscope.
Okay, yeah,
It's the easiest things. Uh, you have a filament in the very head of the microscope, who is heated. This filament, usually is tungsten, is heated to a very high temperature, and this produces electrons,
okay,
right? Then there are a series of lens, magnetic lens. There could be 3 or could be 4 if it's a cryos. These electrons are deflected by these lens, so they become, let's say, more powerful. So then also you can align all these electrons to hit one specific portion of what we call grid, in which you have your specimen. And then under the grid and the electrons, there is the camera, who is registering each single electrons, right? So then that will be your image that
okay,
you will use to align, make it to declassification, 3D, etc. Usually in the microscope, since you are working with electrons, it needs to be working in high vacuum.
okay,
And another thing that was introduced with the years is that if you do these things at room temp, the specimen, your protein, your complex, whatever you have, could be damaged.
okay,
And to reduce this damage, because every time that an electron hits your protein, you cause a mutation, you cause vibration, you risk to break your product. So to avoid that, you work at a very cold temperature.
okay.
That's why it's called cryo.
Cryo, okay,
Yeah. In which you basically vitrify your protein into the grid. And I use the term vitrification because if usually your protein is in a water solution, right? And if the water is crystalline, you risk just to get crystal water. So you don't
ice
see.
crystals.
Yes. So you will not see your protein. You will just see water, right?
Okay,
So you want to work in a amorphous state for the water. So that's why it's called the vitrification. And the thinnest is this water layer, the higher resolution you can get from your protein. So that is something that maybe later in the talk we can discuss, because this is also a disadvantage of this technique. All of these was already done like between 30s and 80s.
Okay.
And then it became easier. So at the end you had your image, but what I do with that image? How can I use that? So in that period, there were many professors or anyway research scientists like Desrosiers, Frank, that create this algorithm that were able to align each images to get to declassification, for example, like see your protein in 2 dimensions. And then later in the 90s, Frank introduced another algorithm in which if you add these 2D classes in different orientation by using a Fourier transformation, you were able to align each single projections or 2D classes on a common central barocenter, let's call it. Mm-hmm. And this will allow you to create this three-dimensional system, right?
Okay.
Then, unfortunately, with the kind of hardware that were present during the 90s, the resolution of these biomolecules was around 7 angstroms, or in the range of 7, 6 angstroms.
Yeah, that's pretty large in terms of proteins, right?
Yes, and also you had to use, it was only useful for very large proteins.
Okay.
So like virus capsids or flagellas. Mm-hmm. Well, then later, like I said, in 2012, with the introduction of the direct electron detector, the resolution became so that helped a lot to reduce the resolution and reach also 3 to 4 angstroms.
Okay.
And then with the introduction of various different systems, the improving of the vitrification, etc. Well, nowadays, for apoferritin, you can get to 1.1.
Oh, wow.
Resolution, yeah. And on average, like you were saying, if you look to the papers that are coming out, mm-hmm. nowadays is around 3 angstroms.
So 3 is considered good,
yes.
Right? Okay.
So you have to think about it. If you are doing structural biology, 3 angstrom, even 3.5 is very good. If you are doing medicinal chemistry, mm-hmm. and you want to do structure-based drug design, your compound is started showing up under 3.5.
Okay.
Angstrom. So if you have 3, that's very good because you see your compound, you see how it binds, you can make your modification, etc.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Also, maybe I just need to say this. When I say 3 angstrom, this is a nominal resolution. So Cryo-EM is not like X-ray. If in X-ray, in crystallography, you have 3 angstrom, every portion of your protein is 3 angstrom. In Cryo-EM, no. In Cryo-EM, the resolution is an average of each single location on the protein. So if I'm saying 3, maybe you have part of your model that is 2 angstrom and another part is 4 angstrom.
4, okay.
And then you get an average that is 3.
Okay.
But you can use different software to calculate the local resolution, so this will help you understand. Because if you are in the 2 angstrom, wherever you are interested is in the 2 angstrom is good. If it is in the 4 angstrom, then it will be challenging.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we briefly, like you just touched upon X-ray. I know it's one of the rival techniques for Cryo-EM. Like it has almost replacing, if I'm correct, the X-ray crystallography. Why is that? And why do you think Cryo-EM is better than X-ray?
I mean, for now, crystallography gives all of you better resolution. So we can then say one is better than the other, right?
Okay.
Because I think they are complementary together with the NMR. They gives you different answer to your questions. The only thing that I can say is that crystallography, you require to have a lot of sample. It needs to be homogeneous, and then you need to be lucky to find one of the conditions that makes your crystals, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That usually is very hard. unless the protein is behaving well, then
Which I'm sure it
never
never is the
happens.
case. Yeah.
Like if you look to the last papers about nucleosomes or DNA binding proteins, etc., these usually have these portions that are very flexible and difficult to crystallize, right? So then makes your life really hard. Whereas for Cryo-EM, yes, it's flexible, but still maybe you will get one of the state in which you will be able to resolve the structure.
Okay.
So the big limitation when we discuss these three techniques for crystallography, it's really the crystallography by itself. So like making crystals. When I was doing my PhD, we tried to crystallize my membrane proteins. We bought 9 different kits with each one of them had 50 different conditions. None of them worked for my protein. So it's like you had more than 450 conditions. But still,
Wow.
I never got one crystal.
So what you were trying the X-ray crystallography then?
Yes, we tried crystallography, we tried Cryo-EM, and then it was easier just to go and do Cryo-EM.
Okay.
Same things for NMR. NMR has the limitation that even in this case, you need tons of proteins. It needs to be homogeneous, perfectly purified, and it needs to be less than 50 kilodaltons.
Okay.
Your protein needs to be less than 50 kilodaltons because then it becomes just a nightmare to figure out which signal is it referring to, right? But still, X-ray and NMR are better for protein less, like I said, 50 kilodaltons. Because Cryo-EM under 100 kilodaltons, it becomes really difficult. Even if nowadays there are cases like hemoglobin, streptavidin, that are all around the 60 kilodalton, and some scientists were able to reproduce. But these are samples that behaves really well. If you have a GPCR, and GPCR usually are around 47, 50 kilodaltons, it starts to become challenging for cryo-EMs doing that. Even if there are examples in which, I think it was published 2 or 3 minutes ago, in which there was this lab in which they collect 5 days of cryos, like 40,000 images, and they were able to get a 3.5 angstrom for just the GPCR in the in detergent. But that's just a case that cannot be routine. So to try to overcome this kind of disadvantage for Cryo-EM, there were synthesized, for example, FABs or nanobodies, in which they stabilize the membrane protein, like the GPCR, and they also increase the weight of your particles. So it goes from 50 to 90, 100 kilodaltons, and that will help you in the 2D alignments and 3D reconstructions. There are other disadvantages of Cryo-EM except of the size. Like I said before, vitrification is one of them. You need to, it's not easy to find the right condition for your protein to vitrify. And you need to spend time trying to different parameters. Like there is this machine called the VitroBoat, in which you load your grid and then you apply your sample, and then there are these 2 pads that close on the grid. And this will remove the excess of the solution before you go and vitrify the grid. So you need to figure out what's the force that I need to use? So how strong is the touching of the pads with the grid? Or how long I wait my solution to stay on the grid. So I allow the solution to spread evenly on the grid, or instead I don't wait, I just do the pads. So that's another time you need to figure it out. And then how long I let my two pads touching the grid. That is another parameter. Do I do everything at 4 degrees? Do I do at 20 degrees? Or I can do at 40 degrees? Because there are some proteins that needs high temperature, like enzymes. What's the humidity that I want in my chamber when I do vitrification? Because
So do you also have to like control the humidity where you're working?
yes, because you risk that then your solution evaporates.
Oh, wow. Okay.
If your solution evaporates, then the concentration increase of the protein, and this can
Correct.
be another problem. So there are all these parameters that you need to figure it out, and sometimes it's even difficult to replicate. So like CryoEM is very difficult to replicate.
Okay.
Because one time it works, and maybe the second time it doesn't work. And then it doesn't, if I can do it, doesn't mean that you can do it in your lab.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because even if these Vitrobot machine are all the same, they will always have some difference, right? So this, if you say that you use some particular parameters like 4 degree, 100% humidity, you waited 4 seconds, and then you use a blot force of 5, and then you didn't wait. So like you just touch it and then go.
Correct.
If I'm going to use that parameters, maybe I will not get your same answer.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like my PhD when I was synthesizing my compounds. It would happen once, and the next day it would work. So,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
science, yeah, it's tough, but yeah,
Yeah.
here we are. But so I remember you were saying that you need like really cold temperature. So I'm assuming you use liquid nitrogen, right?
Yes, so you use there is this bowl in which you are going to vitrify your grids, in which in the side there is a liquid nitrogen.
Okay.
But then in the middle there is this metal reservoir in which you put liquid ethene. That usually it's minus 160, 168. You don't use liquid nitrogen because you risk to put impurities, water impurities, into the grid. So you try to use liquid ethane or a mixture between liquid ethane and propane.
Okay, ethane and propane. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you use the liquid nitrogen around just to keep cold the ethene.
Keep it cold. Okay.
Because if not, it vitrify, and when you're going to put your grid, you just mash it against the solid liquid ethene. Instead, into the microscope, we just use liquid nitrogen to cool it down. Yeah.
Okay. And let's talk about expertise. Like, I know how, like, you have spent your entire PhD learning this technique. So, let's say if you have someone new just getting into this technique, what are your tips and tricks, and how long do you think it takes to expertise in cryo?
I mean, it's always a mechanical thing. So the more you practice, the better you become. You need to have some big background, like these things about liquid ethane or liquid nitrogen. That's something you need to know. You need to know the different type of grids that you have available and when you use that type of grid, because there are carbon grids, there are gold grids, there are supports that you film supports you put on top of the grid. Why you do that? that could be thin carbon, that could be graphene oxide. You need to know, like I said, which kind of parameters you want to use. You need to understand. You need to have that mental sensibility, I think, or elasticity, to understand if your solution it's viscous or not, because that will completely change the behavior of your drop when you're going to put on the grid. So if you have all this background, and then you can practice every day, even with, let's say you go to a lab and they have grids that they were thrown away, you can practice with that. I will say that in a month or two, you will be able to do at least the basic of making grids, for example.
Okay.
One important one, sometimes also it's important how you pick, because you have the tweezer to pick the grid. You need to avoid to go in the middle of the grids because you are smashing it. Also, you don't want to go a little more than the border, because then the grid has a different temperature than the rest. So all around the tweezer, then you will have only thick ice, like you will have crystalline water, because the temperature is different between the two.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So grid preparation, I will say 1 month, 1 month and a half. If you are then a microscopist, someone who load the grids in the microscope and collect images, that usually, I think you can become an expert, not an expert, but you can start to screen
Good
your
enough.
own grid.
Yeah.
In 2 or 3 weeks,
Okay.
without no one besides you telling you what to do. Yeah. Instead, as regard the analysis, there are softwares that are very automatic right now, like CryoSpark, Relion, System. All of these can easily help you doing the 2D classification and 3D reconstruction. But still, there are several parameters or variables that you can change that can help you get the best answer from the data set you collected. You can even use different software together, and I think this you will always learn. So there is not a point in which you will say, "Oh, now I know everything."
Everything, yeah. That
No.
never happens in science, of course.
Yeah.
I remember I was actually in my current lab, I was making grids. And I think, if I remember correctly, I was using the gold ones. It has like tiny number one up on top and we were trying to like image synapse between two neurons.
Uh-huh.
But something, I think, as you mentioned, it takes months of practice and it never worked. So I can imagine how difficult is it.
But sometimes the real bottleneck, I think nowadays, it's the specimen.
Okay.
How good is your sample?
Okay.
Because before it was computational, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because it was really expensive. You need a lot of GPUs, you need a lot of CPUs, etc. But now it's easier to get it.
Okay.
A workstation, or you can use AWS, the Amazon service, the computational service. So that maybe 10 years ago that was a bottleneck, but now not anymore. So everything depends on the biochemistry of your sample.
Mm-hmm.
If your sample is behaving well, you will get a nice grids at the end, and
Okay.
nice 3D reconstruction.
Yeah, so it's like begin with a good sample first.
Yes.
Like don't go beyond if your sample is not good.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes it's really difficult because maybe you have your biophysical, let's say. You have ITC, SPR, calcium efflux, whatever you are doing in your lab, that tells you that your protein is good, is behaving well, and you want to go on the cryo. But then you realize that, yes, it's working, but maybe it's not for CryoEM, or you need to change something in the buffer, because even the buffer, it's important. Do you have glycerol? Do you have anything that is a cryoprotectant? That will make your sample behaving really differently. Because if you have glycerol, you have DMSO. Because if you have a compound, many times the compound is not soluble in water. So you need to use DMSO. All of these kind of materials, chemicals, affect the vitrification. And sometimes you need to remove them to get it to work. Or you need to spend really a lot of time to try to find the best condition for your vitrification process to get one grid, a couple of grids working.
Wow. Okay. And let's talk about cost. I am assuming this is going to be a super expensive technique because it has so many moving elements, and the way it has developed, like you mentioned, it started in the 30s, 80s, and still we have not perfected it. Like, it's always an ongoing process. What are the costs involved here?
If you think about it, a cryos can cost you 5 million.
Wow.
Or even sometimes even more. Depends on how many things you add. Do you want filters in your camera? Do you want to have a faceplate? Or do you want a different, more powerful camera per se? Because there are different cameras you can get. All of these can add cost. And sometimes your microscope can cost even 7.5 million. And then after the first year, you need to start to pay the maintenance.
Maintenance fees.
And maintenance fees sometimes are 20%, 30% of the value.
Of the cost?
Yes.
Oh, wow. That is so expensive.
That will become very expensive. Maybe you have some kind of agreement, for example, with Thermo Fisher, because right now the majority of the scopes are sold by Thermo Fisher.
Okay.
Maybe you can have some kind of agreement. You can pay 10, 15, but still that's a lot if you consider you bought it for 5 to 7.5 million. Even the low quality microscopes, a Tundra or a Glacius, that are also in the range of 1 to 1.5 million.
Okay.
And university, they have an easier life to buy microscopes because you can always use NIH funding.
Yeah.
Or NFS. It's better than NIH is NFS because that is the kind of grants that allows you to buy instruments.
Okay.
Or if you are like in New York, you have all the university in New York, like 9, 8 different universities that decide to put all their money in a centers like NYSBC, and then they decide to buy 6 cryos and then 7 NMRs and etc. So if you are like in that kind of situation, or MIT, Harvard, they have 2 cryos each. That because they have a lot of alumni who gives a lot of money.
Oh, wow.
To allow this to happen. For industries, if you are a company, even if you are a big one, you really need to think about it. It's worth it or not to spend 7.5 million to buy the microscope.
Yeah.
And then you need to buy, you need to make a lab in which in which you need to have a vitropod or a Leica, or you need to buy the plasma cleaner, and then you need to buy the grids, and then if you want to try to do automation of the grid prep, because you can do that, there are instruments like Chameleon or the Vitrojet that makes for you the grids that are also expensive. They also need to be maintained. You need to hire someone who is well trained to manage the grid prep, and then someone else that manage the microscopes. So that's a lot of money at the end.
Yeah.
And not all the industry wants to do that.
Yeah.
So then that's why there are companies like the one that are working now, or there are several other cases in which we offer all of these.
Mm-hmm.
And this will usually, it's a better deal for big companies, in pharmaceutical companies, or even for small one. Mm-hmm. Think about a startup. Mm-hmm. They for sure don't want to spend 10 millions to just
to buy an equipment.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's easier.
No wonder you don't see Cryo-EM in every department. Like it's super expensive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I have to ask you your favorite Cryo-EM discovery, what would that be?
More than one structure, I would say that how became a routine to do GPCRs.
Yeah.
GPCR
is huge.
Like in 2012, you know very well, Lev Fosfi and Kopilka got the Nobel Prize for the beta-adrenergic.
Yeah.
And now, in 2022, 10 years later, once a week you see a new GPCR coming up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
That I think that is... and there are tons of GPCR that needs to be discovered and reconstruct their structure, but still it became a routine. And this was all thanks to CryoEM.
Yeah. I think this was very, very informative, and I think I have one last question for you. If you want to, if you could suggest one article our listeners can read, and I would just link it down in the description, that would be awesome.
I don't have really paper, but I think there are many reviews out there, in particular from Yifeng Chen from Stanford, Wi-Fi Chu, always from Stanford, Bridget Carragher from NYSBC, and naturally then you can look the seminal work of Frank Depuchet, Anderson. These were the three that got the Nobel Prize in 2017.
For Cryo-EM. Yeah. So Cryo-EM is also like a Nobel-winning
there are more than, maybe people don't know, but there are more Nobel Prizes that were awarded not to Cryo-EM but to electron microscopy. For example, in 1986, Ruska got a Nobel Prize for inventing the microscope in the 30s. And there are other. He got for physics, not for chemistry. In 2017 was chemistry.
So Cryo-EM, I think, is like the most Nobel Prize technique, you would say.
At least, I think he has 2 or 3 Nobel Prize.
Yeah, like in bits and pieces. Like microscope got one in physics, and then this, I think in 15 was it Cryo-EM Nobel?
2017.
17, okay. Yes. That was, and I think it was shared by three scientists, right?
Frank, Depuchet, and Anderson.
Okay, awesome.
Yes. So if you look to all these people that I mentioned, in particular, the best review I think are from Yifeng Chen.
Okay.
He was also the first one. Let's say that the seminal paper for membrane proteins and for structural biology about TRPV the vanilloid receptors. I think that was a Nature paper in 2017-18. That was a big breakthrough in
Okay.
CryoEM.
So I will make sure I definitely have link for that paper in the description. And I think with this, it was an interesting episode. And thank you so much, Claudio, for taking the time and discussing Cryo-EM with us.
I mean, it's always nice to talk about science, you know?
Yes, it always is. Thank you so much once again. And with this, I'm going to end today's episode. And please stay tuned for the next episode. And remember, it's good to be a nerd. Bye.